From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, K-State's Dan O'Brien comments on another week of higher grain prices, and he'll offer some things for you producers to think about as you contemplate how to take advantage of the current strength in the markets. Also today, K-State's Sarah Lancaster with advice on controlling post-harvest weed growth on row crop ground here in the fall. She points out the importance of that for moisture conservation, and she'll talk about herbicide choices for the various weed species one would target. And later, K-State's Mary Knapp tells us where is that next chance for rain in Kansas as she glances at the state's agricultural weather scene with us. All that and more here on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Welcome to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. What another resoundingly positive week it's been in the grain markets, and that is our fodder for discussion right now with Dan O'Brien along, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension. He's aboard from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. Haven't seen this in quite a while, Dan, and of course the bullishness has been in place for a couple of weeks or so, but there seems to be no stemming this tide at the moment.
Well, I think it's a surprise when you look at, we can just start looking at these different markets. For D's corn futures, last summer we traded down to about 320 when we saw, no positive way forward in a lot of these markets. And saw large crops, and I think that was before the Derecho came through Iowa, and dry conditions came in the latter part of the year. And that was about August 10th, around that report timeframe. Since then, closed yesterday at 403 3/4. So highest it's been, at least since March of this year and prior to that. So combines are rolling, finishing up harvest, and here we've got a run up like that. A combination of strong demand, reports out of China, and other concerns that are happening. Still questions probably about how harvest will finish up in some of those drier areas. So I just think it's a great surprise for people to consider. When you keep looking down at the trends in other crops, you look at what's happened in the wheat market. Saw yesterday we closed up to a high on the D's contract there of 558 3/4. And again, when you look at where we were in that market as of basically, again, about the same time in early mid-August, we were down to about 420 and closed at 558 here now. So dry conditions.
Classic weather market at the moment, isn't it?
It sure seems to be. And when you look at the drought monitor maps for the western U.S., it is amazing how dry things are. Plus, when you look at the 90-day precipitation map, it's not too bad, but boy, the last 30-day map is just as dark and dry as could be. And that's happening during hard red winter wheat seeding time. So there you go. It's a bear cat of a thing. When you look at soybeans, and of course that's been running up strong based on a lot of export moves and some moderate support from harvest issues and questions. But again, last August, we were at about 860, 875, and that really wasn't the lowest. The lowest was back in April, where we were down to about 850. Closed yesterday at 1062, had gotten as high as about 1075, 1078, thereabouts. So just strong moves. I would say when you look at one thing to watch on these markets is the carry. Again, is anybody giving any incentive to store these crops? And for corn and for soybeans, almost none. A little bit on wheat, but nothing gangbusters there either. So yesterday with D's corn closing at 403 3/4, The carry out to March is basically 1.5 cents per bushel per month, and on out to May, just a pittance, about a half of a cent per bushel per month. No carry out into July, September. That's for corn. So that's a front-loaded market. And for soybeans, about the same deal. Again, November 1062, as we talked about. Look at January, whereas November's 1062 and a quarter, 1062 even for January, 1045 for March, for May, 1021. Part of the deal that's happening, I think, too, is that, we hear glowing reports of how large the acreage is going to be in South America, and that we're going to be expanding, et cetera. But you also hear, if you look for them, reports that, gosh, it is dry as some of those key production areas are dry as all get out down there.
La Nina is impacting that area too. Can't overlook that.
La Nina affects things. And there have been enough times when we've looked at El Nino, La Nina, and started to hang our hats on something happening because of it, and it didn't, that we just kind of discounted, well, here it is, and causing problems in South America. And so we're seeing it here. And as we talked about, you wonder, well, what's the carry in the wheat market, hard red in particular? Again, Dees at 558 on yesterday's close, 566 for March, May 21, 572 and a quarter, July 576. So that's something to think about. Next July, 576 for 2021 futures. However, that's great to have it out there, but it's awfully dry now to be thinking about raising the crop. That's why we have that 576 out there. So just a surprising time. I would add in too that we try to watch some of these ratios of futures and cash in some key areas. New crop futures for next year right now, 2.47 ratio between November 21 beans and Dees 21 corn. And that's kind of almost inconsistent with the talk we've been hearing about large soybean acreage coming in. So I hear what we're saying, that we expect a lot of acres next year for soybeans, but when you weigh corn, new crop 21 corn versus new crop 21 bean futures, you're not seeing a 2.9, 2 point whatever ratio. It's kind of in the normal mode. And I think that's because corn has jumped up here of late. Would say, we try to watch the Garden City cash prices to see if are we feeding all corn, or are we feeding some wheat and grain sorghum with it, in substitute. And right now the ratio on yesterday's cash markets down in Garden City, wheat was 528 cash in garden, and corn was 424, so 1.25 ratio, not feeding a lot of wheat at that ratio. And grain sorghum, 494 cash price, 424, that's for sorghum, 424 for corn, so 1.17 ratio. So, and that's sorghum over corn. So still seeing export demand pull on the sorghum side in the markets. So, I guess just exciting times. And really a thankful reward for people that were blessed enough to get a decent amount of bushels. And now prices have come up some, and they're faced with kind of a pleasant challenge to figure out, well, is this it? Or do I take what we have now? Or, do we look for something else later?
And that really is, Dan, the overarching question. How does a grower, say a row crop producer, take full advantage of what's going on here to store, to sell? Like you say, the carry is suggesting that holding on to corn and beans may not pay. So there's no definitive answer, of course, but a producer really has to sharpen their judgment here, don't they?
We're in a volatile time. You have an election coming up. Financial markets could do anything. If you're whatever would happen could affect what happens in financial markets, could affect the commodities. You would, I guess it's just the old overcautious economist in me coming out and saying that, gosh, if we do have opportunities now that cover costs, given just the financial economic uncertainty in the next several months, you would wonder about pricing at least some of your crop with prices like this.
And on that same tone with the wheat, with uncertainties about the productivity of this crop, it's not out to a rousing start by any stretch. The pricing opportunities for producers right now, how to mitigate how far to go, in effect.
Well, it would seem anything you do, you'd want to make sure you have, it'd be nice if you're going to be proactive to have good crop revenue insurance behind you. Just so you have some floor back there. I don't want to just throw up our hands and say, well, gosh, wheat has so much production uncertainty. How do you forward price it? We should, if we have opportunity. But again, your safety tools, safety net that's out there in terms of crop insurance, whatever else you might have for ARC, county, or PLC are all in play. Particularly if the yield issues come into play, this would be where ARC could have more of an issue. Although again, you're using Olympic averages, this and that, so it's not quite as direct as your own crop insurance, your own crop revenue insurance, or other types of crop insurance. But so you're asking me a direct question on wheat, and I've stumbled around 3 minutes trying to come up to give you a straightforward answer or not. These are prices to look at, but the fear of being overreactive, over-aggressive, and being caught short on bushels is greater probably for wheat, given our dryness right now, than it is for these other crops.
Right. In any event, again, it is an uplifting thing to experience right now for producers, seeing all of our major grains at the levels they are currently, especially considering the row crops, and that we're just about to put the final touches on harvest in so many areas of Kansas. So it's great to see. Dan does cover these markets in full in his weekly notes on the grain trades, and producers, by all means, have a look at those at agmanager.info. A good weekend, Dan. Thanks for checking in with us.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, with his Friday segment on the grain market trends. Stand by for more. After this break, we'll visit with a K-State agronomist about strategies for reining in that weed growth that's now presenting itself in your harvested row crop fields to benefit whatever you're going to be planting there next spring. That's next, here on Agriculture Today.
A social distancing tip.
Putting distance between yourself and others is critical to slowing the spread of coronavirus. So here are ways to stay in contact without the physical contact part. Call, send a text, set up a video conference, post on social media, dedicate a song on the radio. If you have symptoms of fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going to their office. For more info, visit coronavirus.gov.
Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Agriculture Today is back now, and hopefully you row crop producers are motoring right ahead with your fall harvests, successfully so, and those will come to completion here quite soon. Well, at that point, you might want to consider whether controlling annual weeds on that acreage with a fall herbicide application would be in order for you. And to lend some thoughts along that line today, Sarah Lancaster. She's a weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension. And here we are. Some are close to done with corn harvest and pushing close to completion with the other crops. Sarah, you think it's a good time to start planning such fall treatments?
Absolutely. Late October and into early November are great times to be going out with some fall-applied herbicide applications, Eric. One caveat for this year that growers might want to think about is soil moisture and rain in the forecast. So, as we have this discussion today, we need to kind of keep that in the back of our mind that current weather conditions might require some adjustments to guys' plans.
And those adjustments meaning that those weeds need to be actively growing to achieve that control you're seeking, right?
That's right, Eric. So for any herbicides to work, the weeds need to be actively growing. And so obviously drought-stressed weeds are not good targets. And the other thing to think about is that we often want to try to get some residual activity out of our fall herbicide applications. And with really no rain in the forecast, the ability to get those residual herbicides activated is going to be pretty limited for the foreseeable future.
So be patient with your plans here and hope for that adequate amount of moisture to allow you to put these herbicides on successfully. What weeds should one be targeting, though, Sarah?
So some of the great weeds to target, Eric, are going to be those winter annual species. So I was out checking some soybeans to see if they were ready to to harvest last week, and I saw just a mess of henbit coming up. Henbit and other winter annual weeds like that can cause problems in the field. They're going to use moisture that we would rather have for our crops. They're going to potentially harbor diseases or insects over the winter. And, they can just create a mess in the spring when we get ready to plant. So controlling those weeds now can pay big dividends later.
But the array goes beyond just henbit to any number of broadleaf weeds and even grassy weeds.
Absolutely. Even things like dandelion. I've seen some dandelion poking through in some fields. Some other things would be any of the mustard species that you might be seeing coming up. I've been seeing some dock come up in some fields. So, any of those would be candidates for trying to control here as we're in fall.
And one in particular that you think merits special attention here, mare's tail. Why so?
Yeah, mare's tail is a special case. And we'll also, I think, maybe visit about kochia here while we're talking about specific species. So mare's tail is something that is growing, is a problem in various crops and summer crops in Kansas. But the thing about mare's tail is that it really is a winter annual species. So it's actually coming up now, and it will overwinter as a rosette, so just a cluster of leaves on the ground. Mare's tail is not too terribly difficult to control when it's in that rosette growth stage. But then what happens in the spring is that plant does what we call bolt, and so it starts to elongate the stem. And once that happens and that plant starts to get any kind of size at all, it becomes much more difficult to control. So anything we can do to try to get some of those rosettes here in the fall and maybe put something with some residual activity down to try to reduce the emergence throughout the early spring would be beneficial.
And you brought up as well the notorious kochia. We've talked time and again about its issues with resistance to a number of popular herbicides. You think some inroads can be made against it in the fall?
I think so, Eric. So, one of the things that is tempting to think about fall herbicide applications might be that it means you could cut back on your spring herbicide or your planned pre-emergent herbicide when it comes time to plant. And I will not advocate for that. Fall herbicide applications don't replace those spring-applied residual herbicides. But kochia is a special case because kochia comes up so early in the spring that there's a very good possibility that some of your fall herbicide application might be able to give you some buffer in terms of that late winter emerging kochia. We're talking like February, maybe into early March. Before you have time to get out with a good timely spring herbicide application. So, kochia is a summer annual plant that may actually benefit from fall herbicide applications.
Well, when we discuss product selection here, it'll be tied to the species you're going after, but of course, we often have multiple species within a given field. So how would you recommend producers go about that product choice?
I think it depends on knowing the history of your field and then thinking about the crop that you're going to be going into in the spring, right? You need to be aware of plant back intervals for the fall applied herbicides that you're planning on using, and then also be aware of the specific weeds that are in your field and the spectrum of weeds that are in your field. Fall applied herbicides follow the same rules of thumb that our in-season applications do in terms of herbicide resistance management. So in general, you're going to be applying at least a couple of different herbicides with this fall herbicide application.
And you're really looking at two objectives here: burn down of existing weeds and, as you suggested earlier, that residual activity, which may be appropriate for certain species. So one or the other, or a combination of both? What?
Again, it's going to depend on the situation. If you're looking for burn down activity, kind of the standards are the ever popular glyphosate, 2,4-D, dicamba, things of that nature. And then residual herbicides, some common products to think about might be things like sulfentrazone, perhaps metribuzin, something that's going to give you a little bit of residual activity. I would recommend, though, that it depends on what producers are seeing in their fields. If you have a dense stand that's already up, clearly you need something with some post-emergence activity. If you're trying to kind of plan ahead and get ahead for the spring, that residual product is going to be a little bit more important.
Along with this, though, Sarah, producers may be thinking in the mode of spreading their risk management, if you will, with these weeds. And that would come back to perhaps splitting the application rates for a given product, partially in the fall, partially in the spring. Any merit to that?
Yeah, there's really nothing wrong with that. You're going to want to make sure you stay within labeled guidelines and don't exceed maximum total labeled rates. But, there's nothing wrong with trying to split those applications and spread out the length of residual activity that you're going to get from products like, for example, sulfentrazone. Something that you might want to remember, I'll just say here that we should never apply herbicides to frozen ground. Mm-hmm. And so as we're approaching late October, we start thinking about, the potential for freezing temperatures. So one thing I would suggest is that if time does run out for a true fall-applied herbicide application, these split-shot programs can be well adapted for an early spring herbicide application, say 30 or 45 days before planting, followed up with that second shot of the herbicide kind of at planting.
If one's going that route, though, you say likewise, a 50-50 rate split may not be the most advantageous approach. Why so?
I think it's important to remember, Eric, that we only want to try the split approach where that partial rate is still a efficacious rate. What we don't want to get into is situations where we're splitting the rate, and so that we're not applying an effective rate at both times. That is a recipe for a lot of problems, so we want to avoid that.
So need to think that through. But it's good that producers get on top of these weeds in particular, and we've referenced it a time or two, in light of the fact that we have had a dry fall, we're likely to have a dry winter. For moisture conservation, if nothing else, a fall treatment is very warranted here.
Absolutely.
And if producers need more guidance, there's a handy reference for that very thing, is there not, Sarah?
So, yeah, always remember that we have a ton of good information in the Chemical Weed Control Guide. Always remember to read your herbicide labels. But, yeah, be looking for the 2021 Weed Control Guide that's going to be coming out here before we know it.
So look for that. But if you need to act before then, the 2020 Chemical Weed Control Guide from K-State is fully updated on the very latest on chemistry selection as well as application rates and approaches for controlling weeds in the fall on your row crop ground. Producers hop on those annual weeds when it's appropriate. Sarah, thank you for coming over.
Thanks, Eric.
She's a weed management specialist with K-State Research and Extension, is Sarah Lancaster. Really should mention as well that Sarah authored an article on this very topic of fall weed control on row crop ground in the latest Agronomy E-Update newsletter mentioning that, because included in that article is a quick glance to the results of K-State's field trials on kochia control, comparing fall applications to those of early spring. This trial conducted at K-State's research fields at Garden City and Tribune, and it looked at 6 different tank mixes. You can have a look at those results and see what they might suggest about how to approach your kochia problem. That article in last Friday's Agronomy E-Update newsletter, so look for the October the 9th edition at agronomy.ksu.edu under the E-Update tab toward the upper right-hand part of that page. This is Agriculture Today. We'll stand aside now for a few moments. When we return, today's agricultural news headlines come your way. This week's edition of the Kansas Wheat Scoop with Marcia Boswell, likewise. And again, Mary Knapp on Kansas agricultural weather. All of that is still to come here on the K-State Radio Network. Stay with us.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Welcome back to Agriculture Today here on the K-State Radio Network, now in its 96th year of broadcast service to agriculture here in Kansas and the Central Plains. Eric Atkinson with you. On to today's agricultural news headlines for you now. These courtesy in part of DTN. The nation's top derivatives regulator voted yesterday to establish limits on the size of speculator positions in the commodity futures markets, completing a long-delayed effort to enact a provision of the 2010 Dodd-Frank Act. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission established so-called position limits for the first time on 16 agricultural, metal, and energy commodities, while updating federal caps on 9 agricultural commodities that were already subject to those. By limiting the number of contracts that a single participant can amass, the rule now aims to prevent speculators from causing price swings that don't reflect the underlying supply and demand dynamics. The Dodd-Frank Act was passed after the 2008-2009 financial crisis. It included a provision requiring the CFTC to set position limits in response to lawmakers' belief that speculators had caused a sharp increase in oil prices. But the issue proved thorny as it affected a swath of market participants, including farmers and ranchers, hedge funds, and banks. 4 previous formal attempts by the CFTC to establish position limits failed amid opposition from industry, including one final rule that was thrown out by a federal court in 2012. Commissioners voted 3-2 yesterday to approve the final rule. The panel's 2 Democrats, Rostin Benham and Dan Berkovitz, dissenting. They had said the rule delegates too much authority to futures exchanges. Recent market disruptions in the livestock sector led first to a USDA report and now to initiatives to build upon report considerations. The USDA's Rod Bain has more on that.
3 initiatives recently introduced by the Agriculture Department are designed to address and improve aspects of the livestock marketing industry in the wake of a summer report on potential market disruptions over the past year.
We're moving forward with some things that we identified that USDA could be engaged in, and Congress has moved forward with several proposals being introduced that also responds to the report.
Agriculture Undersecretary for Marketing and Regulatory Programs Greg Ibaugh says USDA-led initiatives include producer education to expand risk management strategies, funded by National Institute for Food and Agriculture competitive grants, efforts to encourage increased immediate use of USDA market news information, and upcoming webinars on cattle and carcass grading and establishment of producer-oriented USDA cattle and carcass grading correlation training centers. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
And while there's been progress in rebalancing the trade relationship with China, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says there still needs to be more done. China has a large and growing middle class, he says, over 300 million people. If U.S. companies and U.S. workers can compete for that business, it's one of the largest opportunities. Those were Mnuchin's comments at a conference conducted by the Milken Institute this week. He said, if the U.S. can't compete for that business fairly, then China should not have free access to the U.S. system. He said this needs to be a fair and reciprocal trading relationship. However, Mnuchin did not offer any indication of what would be pursued with China on trade should the Trump administration remain in place after the election. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Well, the USDA regularly keeps tabs on global wheat supply and demand via a monthly report, and the International Wheat Marketing Branch of State Wheat Commissions goes one further. It analyzes and conveys that USDA information to potential buyers of U.S. wheat. Marcia Boswell has more on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
Kansas farmers are just finishing planting and watching their 2021 wheat crop emerge, but world buyers are already highly anticipating next summer's harvest. Each month, the U.S. Department of Agriculture keeps producers and end users alike up to date on the latest projections for U.S. and global wheat production, use, exports, and stocks in its World Agricultural Supply and Demand Situation report. The WASDA report provides a month-to-month overview of global agricultural trade with updated estimates as weather events unfold and crops in both the United States and abroad emerge, mature, and are harvested. The report provides valuable insights into the supply and demand factors that influence the price of wheat. In the latest report issued on Friday, October 9th, USDA projected U.S. wheat production in the 2021 marketing year will decrease 5% year over year to 49.7 million metric tons, equivalent to 1.83 billion bushels, due to lower average yields and decreased planting area. In comparison, production in competing countries like Russia and Canada are expected to see substantial increases from the 5-year average. Despite this decline, USDA expects U.S. wheat exports to reach 974 million bushels, up slightly from last year and the 5-year average. USDA projected hard red winter wheat production to hit 658 million bushels this year. Hard red winter wheat exports were estimated at 412 million bushels, with commercial sales of 198 million bushels already booked as of October 1. Mexico remains the top customer for U.S. hard red winter wheat at 40 million bushels, followed by China, Nigeria, and Japan. To follow along as the marketing year continues, U.S. Wheat Associates provides both a weekly report on commercial sales and a visual rundown of the organization's analysis of the WASDE report. According to Steve Mercer, U.S. Wheat Associates Vice President of Communications, a crucial part of building overseas demand for U.S. wheat is providing information about the global supply and demand situation. Every month, U.S. Wheat Associates creates a graphic representation of the WASDE report on wheat and adds information that the world's wheat buyers can reference quickly. This is a part of the trade service we provide to increase the value and competitiveness of U.S. wheat. The Kansas Wheat Commission is a member of U.S. Wheat Associates, which combines funding from 19 state wheat commissions and cost-share grants from the USDA's Foreign Agricultural Service. As the wheat industry's export market development organization, U.S. Wheat Associates promotes the reliability, quality, and value of all 6 U.S. wheat classes to wheat buyers, millers, bakers, food processors, and government officials in more than 100 countries around the world. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. Well, some relief from this long, drawn-out stretch of dry weather may be in sight, but not for several days yet. K-State's Mary Knapp awaits to fill us in on that. She's in next, here on Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
This is Agriculture Today, and once more, to close out our Friday edition, we bring back in Mary Knapp, climatologist with K-State Research and Extension, for the latest on Kansas agricultural weather from the Weather Data Library here at the university. Again, it's the same headliner. Unfortunately, Mary, it remains ultra dry out there. Has drought been declared statewide as of this week?
We've gotten into the precursor of drought. We're no longer drought-free. We've got abnormally dry conditions across the entire state. There had been pockets in the edge of central to west central Kansas where they'd gotten some moisture to start September. That has pretty much evaporated. Even the north central, where they did get a little bit of rain this week, has filled in with the abnormally dry, and of course the rest of the state. We've got many locations that have gone 30 days without measurable precipitation, so it's no surprise that we have had that rear its head statewide. Unfortunately, we're not seeing a lot of moisture this week, and it doesn't look like anything is on the horizon until after the end of next week's drought period. So we're likely to see intensification across the state.
Our temperatures have started to ease back ever so steadily into more fall-like conditions.
Right. We did have in this last week a bout of very warm weather. The departures from average range from about 6 degrees warmer than normal in the east to almost 14 degrees warmer than normal in the west. And in fact, in Greeley County, the Tribune location had both the warmest and the coldest reading. They got up to 99, and then a couple of days later they went down to 31. So
they're prone to that.
They are prone to that. That's, again, an indication of just how dry the atmosphere is out there, because you can have those wide fluctuations. Unfortunately, accompanying these big temperature swings have been some very strong winds, and that has created some dust issues. Again, up in northwest Kansas, we had that major dust storm that impacted I-70. But given the lack of moisture, it's likely to be a reoccurring issue as we go into our winter. Again, these very vigorous fronts, very strong fronts, are going to trigger those winds. That's going to trigger that potential for dust storms, and of course that also increases the fire danger.
And we've seen episodes of that as well in the past several days. So all due precautions continue to be necessary there. But to our outlook, this weekend, off and on it's been mentioned a slight chance of moisture, but that seems to be a moving target, Mary.
Right. Each time they run the models, they've got a little bit different solution as to what we're going to see and when we might see it. At this point, there doesn't look like anything will be squeezed out of the front that is moving through right now. We're getting some really cold temperatures. Some places are going to see freezing temperatures for the first time this season, but very little chance of any moisture with that. Our best chance looks to be coming at the end of next week, maybe about a 30% chance on Wednesday, but when we look at the 6 to 10 day outlook, which covers the 21st through the 25th, that's when they call for an increased chance of above normal precipitation pretty much statewide. So that looks like our best target for actually getting some significant rains. Again, though, above normal at this time of the year is not nearly as large a quantity as it would have been a month ago.
And that rain would be potentially the product of storms that are now out in the Pacific?
Yes. And again, when you look at that above normal precip, it has the characteristics of a Arctic front where it's coming down. The Dakotas, Nebraska, Kansas are kind of where the focal point for the above normal precip is at. You get down into Oklahoma and Texas, it doesn't have that same pattern in play. So again, we'll have to see how that develops, how much moisture we manage to squeeze out of that particular event.
And speaking of amounts, does the quantitative precipitation forecast suggest anything yet?
Well, the quantitative forecast goes out to 7 days, and this would be after that 7-day outlook. But you'd want to continue to watch that and see how that improves. In the quantitative precip forecast, there is actually some precipitation that's in the outlook for Kansas, but it's very much confined right along the Missouri-Kansas line, where they may see as much as an inch of precipitation, but you get as far west as Manhattan and you're dropping down to maybe a tenth of an inch to a quarter of an inch. Get out towards Abilene and we're already down to a trace, and west of Abilene they're basically not looking at anything at all. Mm-hmm. So again, not a particularly productive week ahead. Our hope would be looking just beyond that horizon to the following week.
The forecast for November has been put out, you say?
Right. They released the November outlook, and they released an updated 3-month outlook. The November outlook, not surprisingly, favors warmer and drier than normal. The November, December, January outlook isn't quite as strong on the warmer and drier, but it is still dominating that outlook as well. Not surprising, the La Nina continues to strengthen. It's expected to continue through the rest of the winter into springtime, and that does very strongly favor drier conditions for us in the Central Plains. And in fact, we will have an article on that in the Agronomy e-update if producers want to look at a little bit more detail on that.
Out later today at agronomy.ksu.edu for the near term and the long pull, then our best hope is for these periodic systems stirring up out west and providing us a quick shot of possible moisture.
Right. That is unfortunately what our best chances are. And again, I remind everyone that we're moving into our dry season. So above normal moisture in November, December, January is not nearly as productive as above normal in September would have been.
All right. As always, Mary, thanks for the input and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Eric.
Climatologist Mary Knapp of K-State Research and Extension right there. And thanks to you as well for tuning in. Please be back with us on Monday. Until then, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good weekend for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.